This event happened in 2015, during a period when work pressure and the general monotony of daily life began making me feel suffocated. My name is Marcus, and my personal ritual to clear my mind and regain perspective was solo long-distance hiking. These were not quick morning strolls. I usually aim to be alone on a trail for 8 to 10 hours, just met the dry desert, air, and the quiet rhythm of my own footsteps. That day I chose a trail in Arizona. The landscape was a dramatic contrast, beginning with a stretch of sun-scorched barren desert. Before rising toward a medium-sized mountain, following the ridge, the trail eventually led into a deep ravine, almost like a canyon at the summit. I had left early before Arizona's brutal heat could burn everything. Finding the trailhead was an adventure in itself. The trail seemed almost completely unknown. There was no designated parking area nearby. I had to pull over onto already used dirt shoulder, and the actual trail entrance was difficult to find. It was hidden behind a messy wall of thick shrubs and thorny bushes. When I pushed through, what lay ahead was faint, faded, and looked more like a deer track than a hiking path. I never deliberately searched for little-known trails, but I definitely preferred them. Crowds, dogs, and constant loud chatter on busy trails always shattered the stillness and solitude. I craved this nameless, forgotten path suited my purpose perfectly. I felt content, knowing it seemed untouched. As I began climbing, the desert vegetation gradually gave way to mountain forest. Though most of the trees were also withered, the trees grew more and more desiccated, until most stood like skeletal remains. Earth, the harsh bluesky. The trail clearly had not been maintained for several years. Signs of neglect were everywhere. Many dead trees had collapsed, entirely blocking the path, leaving large heavy branches broken and scattered, forcing made to step over or go around them. Shrubs began growing in ward, making the path narrow and uneven despite the rough terrain and the eerie silence of the dying forest. I kept moving forward. I welcomed both the physical challenge and the deeper sense of isolation. It created the trail's zone, pushed through thick, overgrown brush, though down. Despite the encroaching vegetation, the trail itself remained clear enough, a distinct depression in the dirt, to reassure me I was still on track and not lost. I checked the time. I had been hiking for about 2 hours, feeling that familiar mix of exhaustion and clarity. I inhaled a deep breath of dusty, still air and continued the climb, focusing on the path ahead. I continued following the trail, and the deeper I went, the more desolate and remote the landscape became. The silences wallowed the forest, broken only by the crunch of my boots. Sun-dry gravel, everything evoked a sense of abandonment. The surviving branches seemed to be struggling desperately. I was used to solitude when hiking alone, but the absolute stillness and the decay of this trail began to feel different, a bit chilling. Although the trail pushed through thick, overgrown brush, I persisted. The feeling of being on an unmaintained path, yet still seeing traces of those who had walked before, reassured me I was not completely lost. If focused on the faint depressions underfoot and stepped over the thorny branches, and the night appeared, I was climbing what felt like an endless incline when I heard a very clear, distinct sound. It was a whistle coming from somewhere higher up the mountain. Above me was not wind cutting through rock or a bird call. It had melody, smoothness, and was unmistakably human. The whistle carried a few notes before stopping abruptly, as if the person had run out of breath or suddenly realized someone was listening. Admit that moment sent a chill through me, made me quite uncomfortable. I had been hiking alone for hours, and the isolation of this trail was already well established. I did not expect to encounter anyone. Still, I pushed away with logic, telling myself there had to be someone else on the trail at that moment. That was the only reasonable explanation. Perhaps another hiker or a hunter scouting the area. I kept walking, trying not to dwell on the whistle. I went another 20 minutes, or roughly a quarter mile, when it happened again. This time, the whistle carried the same melodic tune, but now it was much closer and significantly louder. The sound came from the mountainside to my right, as if the person was heading in the same direction or moving faster than me. Though I heard no footsteps, another noise besides the whistle, the sudden nearness of the sound unnerved me. Cold sweat began forming, not just from the climb. The discomfort that shifted into a faint sense of alarm. Yet I am not the type to turn back easily. I told myself I would not retreat just because some guy was whistling nearby. Even so, the unease mad. Memory alert, I continued another quarter mile, but by then I had already pulled out my pocket knife, gripping it firmly in my right hand in case something went wrong. My eyes swept across the brush and Rocky just searching for any sign of the mysterious whistler, but is a nothing except dead trees and jagged shadows. In this tense state, I began entering the area where everything was about to change. I walked in a state of extreme alertness, the anxiety growing steadily, my hand clenched tightly around the pocket knife, not because I believed it would help much, but because it gave me a small sense of control in a situation. I did not understand. The farther I went, the more intensely. I listened, not just for the whistle, but for any sound at all, even a snapping twig or a faint step. But there was only the wind slipping through dead trunks and the rustle of leaves under my boots. After a while, I reached an unpleasant obstacle. A large fallen tree lay across the trail. This was not a simple log to step hovereth that many thorny branches, forming a nearly impassable barrier without getting scratched. Although I could have tried climbing over the sharp protruding branches, made me decide it would be safer and faster to walk around. A step to the right, moving about 2 steps off the trail to go around the collapsed tree. As soon as I did and noticed the terrain drop suddenly, I was standing on the edge of a small valley, a deep depression, perhaps the bed of an old stream or river long dried up. I stopped to observe the area. The depression was not too large. It created a clear open space among the brush and trees, and right in the center of that dry valley. It was a dense structure made from branches and large wooden stakes piled and arranged in a deliberate, complex way. It was not a random mess from storms. The way the branches interlocked and were fixed together made it obvious it had been built by a person. It was far too intricate and clearly shaped to be an animal, nest, or a natural formation. It looked like a crude shelter, but sturdy and large. Chills through my body, colder than the desert air the earlier day. Discomfort about the whistle transformed instantly into real fear as I connected the two details, the melodic whistling and the savage stick-built den in the middle of an isolated, forgotten trail. I began spiraling mentally. Who would live here? Why build a shelter like this, completely cut off from civilization? Could the whistling belong to whoever lived in this den? Were they marking territory or trying to communicate? Whatever the answer, it was dark and wrong, one every level. An indescribably bad feeling washed over me, something primal telling me I had gone tuva. Or that I had seen something I was not meant to see. Any intention to continue the hike evaporated. I knew it needed to leave, and it needed to leave immediately. It took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I slowly turned around, deliberately heading back toward the trail to begin my urgent retreat down the mountain. But the moment I turned to step away, the whistle came again. This time, it was not distant or high above. It came from somewhere extremely close, incredibly, terrifyingly close. The sound came from right behind me, from the valley. I had just turned my back on my heart. Dito stopped, the whole body freezing in a reflex. I could not control the rush of blood in my ears, drowned out everything else. I spun around almost instantly, facing the stick den, bracing myself to confront a man, a drifter, or perhaps something worse emerging from the shelter. But what stood before me was not a man. Instead, there was a goat standing just behind the valley, exactly where I had heard the whistle. It stood perfectly still, its eyes locked on mine. It was larger than any wild goat I had ever seen in the area. The size difference made it seem almost unnatural, its eyes. I felt as if it was looking through me, as if it was not an animal, but a person staring at me from behind a mask. My mind went into total panic, reason blown away. I could not process any of it. A goat? Why was there a goat standing motionless like a statue? And why was it sound naturally large? And most importantly, how could it have produced that melodic human-like whistle after a few tense seconds? I forced myself to regain a sliver of control. I began backing away very slowly, never turning my back on it. I did not want to look away. And then the true horror happened. I stepped back slowly, each movement deliberate, trying to keep my breathing steady and not break the tense, locked stare between me and the creature. The pocket knife in my hand felt useless. Now every cell in my body screamed at mid-run the shred of rationality. I had warned that a sudden movement could trigger whatever was happening. The goat remained completely still. I had never seen any animal hold such unnerving stillness. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, as if it was waiting for some signal. When I stepped back again, shifting my weight to my rear foot, suddenly the goat moved. It opened its mouth. The way it opened it was not how a goat or any mammal opens its mouth to bleed or chew. Its jaw dropped in a natural way, creating an odd gapping shape. The movement was almost at which wrong for normal anatomy. And then from that dark opening came not a bullet, not a grunt. It produced the exact whistle I had heard too many times. The sound was not an imitation or an accidental resemblance. It was the same melody, the same pitch, the same eerie musical smoothness, but this time it came from the throat of a massive goat in that momental co. Trolandries and collapsed. There was no logical explanation for what I was seeing. This was not a goat, it was something else, a creature wearing a shape, a distortion of nature, or were something beyond my understanding. Primal terror overtook me so intensely that my limbs went numb. It stopped thinking entirely. I bolted. It turned my back to the valley, recklessly, and sprinted downhill. It no longer followed the trail. I just ran trashing through fallen trees and brush. It fell repeatedly, sliding on gravel, slamming into rocks, but the adrenaline roaring through me kept meth. Rom feeling pain all, I knew ways that it needed to get away. It needed distance from the thing that had whistled, the thing that stood motionless, watching inside the skin of an animal. I heard branches snapping around. Me may be from it. I did not dare look back when I was nearly spent, stumbling forward on pure fear. I heard it again. The whistle echoed one last time, this time softer, gentler, but somehow echoing clearly through the mountain slopes like a mocking farewell or a distant warning. It was only a sound, but it was enough to make me sprint even faster. Despite gasping for air, I did not stop until I crashed through the dense brush at the trailhead and found myself beside my car. I dove into the driver's seat, locked the doors frantically, and drove off without looking back. I drove far, not stopping until the dry mountains of Arizona were gone from my rearview mirror for years afterward. It never told anyone about this encounter. I assumed Noon would believe. They would think I was a coward or hallucinating. It told myself it had only been a large mountain goat with some strange throat deformity. Yet I could note racetheum, age of its eyes, or the unnatural way its mouth had opened. In ever returned to that trail only recently did I hear about skinwalkers, a figure in Navajo lore. Of 10 described as an evil witch capable of shape-shifting or wearing animal forms. Since I read more about the every cold detail, fit the starring the unnatural size, the mimicry of human sounds. It seemed like the only explanation for what I witnessed that encounter changed me. I am no longer someone who dismisses the supernatural, but in no longer fully trust ordinary logic either. Tonight's story ends here. If you have a real horror story, send it to DarkWhispers Audio. Let's share the fear together. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next whisper might come sooner than you think.